Hi everybody, I'm gonna watch this video about grain sludge.
Bread is important to all Western cultures, but it was extremely important 200 and 300 years ago, specifically to the poor.
It was important to the poor because they did not had enough meat to eat.
Bread is what poor people survived upon, whether they were in the country or in the city. There are several times in the 18th century there are crop failures, and the wheat is so very
There were crop failures because the pesticides were not as effective or even not exist. They did not even exist.
very expensive that bread doubles and triples in price. That becomes almost impossible for poor people to have their mainstay of food. So if bread doubles or triples in price and the poor survive on bread, what do? What do they use as that substitute for wheat bread? This really isn't a problem for the rich or the middle class. They will always be able to get wheat.
Yeah, the rich and the middle class ate the same thing as the poor. Okay, not exactly. But yeah, at least they consumed some type of white bread, okay? And they did not have to combine all of these other types of grains with the wheat.
Maybe it'll be expensive imported wheat, but wheat is available. They can afford it. At the very end of the 18th century, the British government saw the problem with this. They started doing research on what were the substitutes for wheat when you're making bread.
What are the substitutes for the wheat? Meat.
They did all these
That's the best substitute for bread.
tests, and there was a great book printed in the early 19th century, 1804, that
Does this look food? What is in here? This one is like powder. Yeah, it would hurt your gut. You would need to crunch a lot on this. Yeah, it's just not food, guys.
talked about the art of bread making, and in that, they laid out all the substitutes for wheat. And we get an idea here about what they were using for substitutes. Sometimes they're new substitutes,
I don't eat any of this.
but the vast majority of them were things that have been used for hundreds of years as substitutes for wheat whenever it got expensive. The research
Barley, buckwheat, maize, rye, rice, oats, beans, peas. Everything is toxic here, I swear. At least back in the days it wasn't as much pesticides, so I would say it was somewhat healthier, okay? Because yeah.
lays out the different substitutes and what they cost. Some of these substitutes weren't any better than wheat. They were just as expensive. Rice is a wonderful example of this. You can make rice bread, but in the 18th century,
Even rice was as arsenic, no? I mean, this arsenic thing, it just appeared because of industries, no? I don't know.
rice was almost as expensive as wheat, so there was no real reason to use it. Another one of these substitutes that seemed to be almost as expensive as wheat were white peas. And I'm not even sure exactly what they meant by white peas. Probably a type of kind of bean. I don't know exactly, but it was really expensive in the time period. Two of the least expensive were barley and oatmeal. And these were already a common substitute in the south of England and, of course, in the north of England and Scotland, where
And some of the vegans and even other people, they buy right now bags of oatmeal when there's meat in the store, man.
oatmeal was very, very popular. So that
Actually, oatmeal is kind of cheap compared to... yeah. You can get plenty of plates of oatmeal for the price that you would buy. It's almost like 5 times more expensive, I would say. Yeah, in some cases less, but I would say 2-3 times more expensive than red meat, than the one that I'm buying. And I'm eating just one meal out of that. And the person who buys a bag of oatmeal, they make like 3 meals out of it. So even now, it's kind of for the poor, I would say.
That is what the poor had been subsisting upon all this time. They rarely ate wheat bread anyway. One of the grains that's mentioned
But even the people who are not poor, even the people who are making like more money than me, even then some of them, they just buy oatmeal.
are beans. And that's what I want to focus on today. Bean
And beans, man, come on.
bread. Or even in the time period, sometimes something called horse bread. And horse bread is very interesting. It's been made for hundreds of years, even in the 18th century, and it was made to feed horses. Whether you are going on a trip and you don't know whether there'll be fodder along and you need to be able to carry your food, it's hard to carry a whole lot of hay with you if you're taking a horse, but you can take horse bread. So they would feed specialized horse bread to race horses, to work horses, horses that are sick, or they'd use them in circumstances where they didn't have the proper fodder. Horse bread was not quite like bread that we think of today, but it was made by the baker. In fact, in some places in Great Britain, it was illegal for anybody but the baker to make horse bread. And horse bread was made with ground beans, peas, sometimes something like oats or barley, and probably no wheat. And they would
Look at that, man. Like, you should be happy that somehow you have right now some white bread, because look at this. This is like so much fiber, man. For a horse, it's somewhat okay, because it has different digestive system. But imagine being born a human, and you just don't have money. You're being born poor. You don't have money for meat, and you're eating this complete fiber, man.
would use a very coarse grind. They wouldn't bother to put anything like yeast in it, and they would make these hard, dense cakes of bread just for horses. When
I actually had something similar. It's I don't know what it was made out of, but it's called like house homemade bread or something like this back in Transylvania, and I actually had problems like digesting it, and I don't know, it's even considered there something expensive for some reason. But yeah, there's no and then I never bought it again. I was just buying white bread.
wheat became expensive, then poor people who couldn't afford anything else, would have to eat horse bread. Using beans as a substitute for wheat seemed
Very sad times. And people today, they just eat beans like it's something nutritious. And back in the days, they were forced to eat this because they knew that meat is good for them.
like it would be pretty easy for
But they
bread,
just could not afford it. Meat was even more expensive than wheat.
but it's not easy. Wheat you just grind up into flour and you mix it with your water and your yeast and a little bit of salt, and ta-da, you've got bread. But beans ground up don't work very well. In fact, some beans even have a kind of toxicity to them. So unless
Some, all of them.
they're soaked,
The only reason why wheat is somewhat better because it has higher like more carbs in it, okay? Then that's what it makes it better. Beans have less carbs. Rice is also, as he said, rice is almost same price. So yeah, white rice in this case, yeah, that's also better. It's less toxic. It's still not healthy, but somewhat it's less toxic, and at least you get more carbs out of it. While beans have like they even have low glycemic index, and yeah, they even cause more gas, and yeah, it's just toxic.
or cooked in a certain way, they're not good
And it's one thing to just eat a small portion of meal where you cooked some beans, but imagine eating an entire bread out of it where it was many seeds on it. It's going to digest way harder, and yeah, just don't get much out of it. You just end up malnourished.
good for you. Beans ground up just as they are generally kind of have a bitter taste, and they don't make anything that's
It has bitter taste because it's toxic, like I said.
very palatable, at least for humans. Apparently horses didn't mind that much, so that for horse bread,
Yes, horses can tolerate it.
they would just grind up the beans and toss it right in. But for people, if people want to eat a bean bread, then you have to kind of work on those beans. They have to be soaked, but you can't soak the beans and then grind them into a flour. That wouldn't work very well. You'd have to like let them completely dry out again. So the directions that we get in the 18th century are to grind the bean into a fine flour and then soak that flour. Now, that's hard to do. If you just add a little bit of water to the bean flour, you make a paste, and you can't switch the water on it. It does not work, because what we want to do is change the water a couple of different times, and that'll take the bitterness away. Now, they were very familiar with this kind of a technique. They would use it on things like salt beef and salt pork to wash away the salt. So soaking bean flour can be tricky. We have to have a lot of water, and we just stir it a little bit and let that settle very rapidly, and then pour that off once or twice. The directions in our book in 1804 talk about putting our beans to soak for 3 days, changing the water each day. And then you have this sodden bean flour that you can put into your flour mix and make a bread that's 50-50, bean flour and wheat flour. There are a lot of different kinds of beans that are listed in the 18th century, and we could use something like the fava bean or a field pea, which is a kind of bean. We've got white beans and red beans, cranberry beans, all these kinds of beans. None of
All these kind of beans have different types of toxins.
those were specifically separated out in our recipe. So we can try some of those different ones to see if some have a more bitter flavor than others. I picked a bean that's giving us the whitest flour. Some of these cranberry beans and other beans have a darkness from the shell of the bean, but I picked a yellow bean and a white bean, kind of mixed them together to give us a white bean flour. Right out of the mill, the bean flour looks good. It's got a good color to it. It's a little yellowy looking, but
Last time I ate beans, it was when I was on high carb, low fat. And I instantly stopped. I just don't miss them.
you know, it looks like your standard run-of-the-mill flour. But it's definitely
Actually, the only way, like I so-called like them, the only way I would consume them, it's when it was like tomato beans, like it was made them, it was like nicely cooked, and you didn't really felt that you're having beans, and then it was in like in a sweet tomato sauce, okay? Because yeah, that's somewhat tolerable, and with some meat, oh my god, yeah, that's completely different, okay? Like that's the thing. When I tried it just a vegan, it was just so bad, man, and so empty. It did not felt at all like how it was made back home. The lack of meat, it's just you can just feel the difference.
definitely got a strange raw bean smell to it, and I'm sure the taste would be very off. You could instantly tell this was nothing like a wheat flour, and if I made bread with this just as it was, it would probably just be clammy and have just a very strange, almost metallic taste to it. I'm working from the Art of Bread Making book in 1804, and it has a recipe for mixed bean bread. So we're going to start off with whole wheat flour and mix that with a little bit of salt and a little bit of barm here. And it's going to be a very, very dry mixture. But I've already got my bean flour that's been soaked. This has been soaking for 3 days, and I've taken the water off each day, and what I'm left with is a very, very heavy slurry that we're going to add into our flour, and that will probably bring
Vegans be like, delicious.
along all the moisture we're going to need. In fact, maybe just a little bit more than we need. And we'll mix that in with our wheat flour, and it will end up being about 50-50 bean flour and wheat flour, along with that salt and our barm, which is the yeast. And we've talked about barm in other recipes. That has to do with the yeast that comes off the top of a brewing batch of beer that you get from the brewer. In fact, it's better if you get
I didn't know this. I had no idea where does yeast come from.
ale, because then you don't have that bitterness of beer. If you're doing this in a modern context, standard packets of yeast that you get at the grocery store will work just fine. Once this is mixed well, we can go ahead and set this aside and let the yeast work.
Once I tried to bake some pizza dough or whatever, and it sticked so much to my hand, and I was like, oh my god, I never do this again. Yeah.
These substitutes have been going on for hundreds of years.
And it's so difficult to do dishes after this, man, because it just sticks to the bowl and it just doesn't come off. Oh my days, yeah, better just have some raw meat.
Whether it's the Scots with oatmeal or the south of Great Britain with barley, and more classically in North America, corn, or as
So first you need to soak it to so-called get rid of some of the toxicity and some of, then that's why you're changing the water, okay? You don't change water because it gets full of bacteria or whatever, because the bacteria wouldn't matter because you're gonna cook it anyway. You need to change water because it's super toxic. Beans are super toxic, okay? And yeah, and after you got rid of some of the toxicity and you got rid of some of that bad taste, what did he say? It's sour, not sour. He said like a whatever. Yeah, after you got rid of, then you put it in fire to destroy it even further, and then you finally can eat it. I would say, yeah, this is the easiest way to eat it. It's better than to just eat it raw or just cooked.
In the book, it's called,
because this is as destroyed as you can destroy it.
Maize. So corn in North America is what everybody's eating for bread. Sometimes they'll have a bread that does have a mix. So they'll mix it with rye and they'll mix it with wheat to make a high-class bread that still has corn in it. Very few people, especially in that middle and lower class here in North America in the 18th century, are eating wheaten bread. That is a special bread and not eaten that often. Most people are eating cornbread. Our bread was in the oven about 30 minutes or so at 400. It was in the earthen oven, so it kind of started high and worked a little low. It did not rise a lot. I don't know whether it was
the food that ruined many people's genetics.
Because of the beans or because my barn wasn't as active as I needed it to be, but that's all right. This is probably exactly like a loaf was like 200 or 300 years ago as they're making bean bread. And it's interesting as we dig in that they were looking for solutions to this problem of not having enough wheat in 1804. But they had been having those problems for 200-300 years before that, and the solutions were there. People were making bread with other kinds of grains. This is one of those examples. So let's find out what this tastes like. That's the important part. And now, the smell, great, wonderful whole wheat loaf smell. But the taste is like a whole wheat loaf, but you can definitely tell there's some bean in there, maybe a little bean bitterness. Regardless,
maybe a little bit of bean bitterness. It's there, man. You should just throw it out. If you don't like something, then you don't eat it.
This is bread. This you can survive.
I know that these were like different times.
On. Those poor people in the 18th century, they might have had to survive on this, and it would get them through the day. It would fill their bellies. This is the solution to the problem of very
That's not the solution at all.
Expensive wheat.
I mean, it's better than eating absolutely nothing. But this is not food, guys, and even nowadays you should just avoid it completely. This looks really, really bad. Like, I got so disgusted since I switched to raw primal. I got so disgusted of grains. Even when I tried those type of junk foods that has like wheat or anything else, I was like very aware that on my days that yeah, this has grains and you should not consume it, and it just feels dry no matter how they do it. Okay, the one that I said in the other video, the Swiss roll, the chocolate Swiss roll, the thing about that wheat, because it kind of feels spongy, like it's not going to be as tough as this, and that somewhat makes it tolerable, but it still feels like a sponge in your mouth. I don't know, man. Yeah, I think that's the video.